You're listening to the 49 Carats Podcast, a 49ers Goldmine production with Stephanie Sanchez.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another edition of the 49 Carats Podcast. I'm your host, Steph. It is Tuesday, April 29th. This is going to be like the last draft show that I do. We've had a lot of shows talking about the draft, but I'm very excited to have one of my good friends on the show today to talk about the 49ers draft. But before we get into that, couple of things to sort through here, as the 49ers gave us some pretty good content here to discuss. George Kittle and the 49ers finally hashed out this 4-year extension they've been working on. This now makes him the highest paid tight end in the NFL. He surpassed Trey McBride's extension. And this, ultimately gives him the opportunity to join the 10-year club with the 49ers, get his name, his little picture on the wall of 49er 10-year players. That'll be great. We'd love to see George Kittle retire as a Niner. And then the other piece of news is that the 49ers may not have drafted a tackle, but they signed a veteran tackle instead. That is with DJ Humphries, who they signed today. He spent last season with the Kansas City Chiefs, a season that was, far from perfect for him, but I think the 49ers are going to see what they have in him. At the very least, he makes sense for that swing tackle role with, Trent, going on 37 years old, McKevich. Should any of those two guys miss any time, I think DJ Humphrey makes a ton of sense. And the best part of all, this signing does not count towards the compensatory pick formula in 2026. Today was the first day the teams could sign players without accounting towards it. So good move on the 49ers part. But speaking of the draft, again, this is where I'm going to bring in my good friend, Ryan Roberts, on the show. Ryan, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well, Steph. I'm doing well. I always appreciate coming on here for the post-draft conversation. I was actually thinking about this the other day when you were texting me, and I was thinking about like 2018 probably is when we met, right? And like both of us were just like barely getting into the industry, and trying to figure it out and everything.
We were great, for sure.
Yeah, it's really awesome to see how far you've come. I mean, you're doing a great job, obviously, with the 49ers coverage and everything. So I just appreciate you for having me on as always.
Yeah, you as well. And for anyone who doesn't know, Ryan is the NFL draft and college football analyst for A to Z Sports. And also he's a scout for the CGS All-Star, which, I follow along with the CGS. I have Mike Riddleman. I've had him on the show the last 2 years now. So, good friend of the pod as well. But Ryan, I always enjoy having you on for these because it's good for me to kind of take a step back on this draft and then also get your thoughts. I mean, I see it from the 49ers point of view of these picks, and I have the context of how maybe they want to use some of these players, but you've been following along with some of these prospects. And as we were discussing, backstage before we went on, some of these guys up to, 6 years or so, or 5, however long since the COVID year in 2020. So there's been a lot of players that you've been following, and, just from since they started their career. So I can't wait to get your thoughts on the 49ers draft class. And, without further ado, let's get into the 49ers first pick that they made. That was Mykel Williams with the 11th overall pick. The 49ers kept all of their original picks in this draft, so that helps. And then just for additional context, Ryan, and I'm sure you already know this, Robert Saleh is back.
Yep.
They let go a lot of defensive players. They were atrocious in the run defense last season. So, I think right off the bat, they were looking to improve the defense and particularly the run defense. So how do you think they did with their first pick in Mykel Williams?
I think this is the most advantageous spot for Mykel Williams, to be honest, because like you said, he kind of fits what Coach Saleh wants to do with the defense and get more physical up front, play better run defense. And Mykel Williams is maybe the highest floor run defender of any defensive end in this class because he's 6'5". He's 260 plus pounds. He's got the length. He's physical. And at Georgia, this is kind of his biggest strength, but maybe his biggest flaw at times. They asked him to do a lot of things from like varying alignments. Like you would see him out as a 5'7", 9" at times. You would see him inside on some passing situations. You would see him in 3-man fronts a lot as well. So like he was asked to do a lot of the dirty work at Georgia, which toughened him up, obviously. Like, he's able to play in the run game really well. He's still young. He still has a lot of upside athletically for sure. I think for 49ers fans, just generally speaking, I don't know if you should anticipate for me, like Mykel Williams being a dominant pass rusher year one, especially because he's still a guy that he's developing. And I think that Georgia, this is the flaw in Georgia. They asked him to do a lot of the dirty work, and there was rarely ever just like, hey, Mykel, pin your ears back outside of like the Texas game this year. Like, pin your ears back, get after the quarterback. That just wasn't what he was asked to do a ton. So I think run floor, absolutely. Pass game, still a little bit of a question mark, but I think that it does, one, ease my mind that Coach Saleh is back because obviously he is a great defensive mind. And then two, I think him being paired and being able to learn under Nick Bosa is the most advantageous situation for him. Like, he needed to go with a proven veteran, one of the best pass rushers in the NFL. And Bosa especially, I think, is great for him because Nick Bosa wins off of his savviness as a rusher, right? Like, he understands how to use his hands. He understands how to set moves, counter moves, inside moves. Like, he understands all the tools in the arsenal. And if he's able to rub off on Mykel Williams, I think that the upside is tremendous.
Yeah, I definitely do see that him being like a high floor kind of pick, just given the fact that he does have the run defense part of his game down pat, and the rest he could kind of figure out along the way. And you're right, he has the tools in place to help him do that. He has the tools in himself physically to do that, the athleticism to figure that out as well. So I feel pretty good. There were a couple of things that, John Lynch, Kyle Shanahan after the draft, kind of mentioned the interest in maybe having him line up inside and over guards, right? Because he showed at Georgia that he can have success doing that. And so they kind of likened it to the Eric Armstead role. If you recall that, he had that inside outside versatility. And so early on, I think Mykel will probably have some of that to offer the team. I think this is a day one starter, right?
Yeah.
You would see him as the same way. Okay. So,
yeah.
I think he's going to be out there on those base downs, just setting that edge. And then on those obvious passing situations, I think he can maybe move inside. So we'll see as it takes shape, but I think that's the initial plan for him.
Yeah, and it makes sense, obviously. I would kind of compare it a little bit, and they're not the same player, but I just think fundamentally in the early portion of their careers, I would expect like 49er fans to maybe appreciate like a Trayvon Walker type of ascension as a player, because if you remember Trayvon Walker, a lot of people were calling him a bust after his first year because he only had like 4.5 sacks or something like that. But he was a very quality run defender and he was still figuring out the pass rush. And then year two, he gets 10 sacks, right? So like, I think that's what you're hoping with Mykel. Early, you're getting the floor, but long term, year two, year three, you're trying to find that ceiling as a pass rusher because the tools are certainly there. It's just, again, I just fundamentally don't think that Georgia asked him to be that player all the time. But you saw against Texas, because I just see Texas highlights after Texas highlights, because that was the one game where against Kelvin Banks and Cameron Williams, they said, Jalen Walker, Mykel Williams, go win as pass rushers, go win. And that was a big reason that they won that football game, particularly in that first one. And yeah, so I think that seeing that type of game and seeing what he can be as a pass rusher is certainly there. But again, you're getting that run defense floor very early on in his career.
Yeah, and Kelvin Banks going a couple spots ahead of him. So I think that's also nice to kind of compare how those two picks went against each other. But speaking of Texas players, the 49ers went the Texas route in the second round with defensive tackle Alfred Collins, sticking with the defense here and sticking with the run defense, Ryan. Personally, I loved this pick. This is probably my favorite pick of the draft that they made, but it's okay. You could say some bad things about it. I'm open to hearing your feedback, but I'll tell you what I did like about him. I think he has the size, the arm length is crazy. I think that makes him a pretty good run defender because, and also probably why he barely misses any tackles, right? He's just able to wrap guys up with those long arms. very durable player. I know there were some questions around his medicals, and certainly, you know, him wearing the boot at pro day was like, oh no, what's going on? Personally, I'm not too worried about that. Obviously, I'd imagine the 49ers aren't too worried about that as well. He just plays with a certain energy and tenacity that I love to see out of defensive tackles. But give me your thoughts on Alfred Collins.
I mean, it was a really interesting career for Collins, because if you go back to his recruiting class, I can't remember. I assume he was probably the 2021 recruiting class. Don't quote me on that though. But he was a big time recruit. I mean, like, he was a 5-star by multiple services coming out. He's a Texas kid, stayed at home with the Longhorns, obviously. But at that point, he was like a 285 pounds, like, defensive end that maybe projected inside. And early on in his career, Texas used him a lot of big, like, strong side defensive ends. Then eventually he kind of works his way inside. But like, for the first couple years of his career, actually, I mean, I would say the first 4 years of his career, I thought that he was just very average, you know, like, I just don't think he was great. This past year, he made a huge jump. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was health. Maybe it was finally growing fully into his body at like about 330 pounds now. But whatever it was, he went from a very average player for Texas to one of the better run defenders in all of college football this last year. And I think that graphic right there of like the production, like, that isolates it, right? Like, his every number across the board outside of sacks was up, because I think that he really found his role. Now, as he's added weight, though, I will say the athleticism that people marveled at when he was younger, I think it has gotten zapped a little bit in terms of, like, I don't think his first step is quite as dynamic as what he was when he was 285 pounds, obviously. Like, that's like a foregone conclusion. But I do think he's gotten very powerful. He's gotten better with his hands. I mean, he's got bricks in his hands. Like, he's incredibly strong at the point of attack. And I do think he serves a very solid floor as a run defender. I don't think that you're ever going to get a penetration player as far as like a guy that's going to have like double-digit tackles for loss in a season, but you're hoping that this guy ends up being a 330 pound nose tackle that doesn't get moved off the line of scrimmage and lets guys like Fred Warner behind him just run free for days, sideline to sideline. So I think clearly you talked about wanting to improve the run defense. If there was any indication that they wanted to do that, look at these first 2 picks. And then obviously when we get into the 4th round, I think there's another example of like they really wanted to tackle run defense big time. And Alfred Collins was certainly one of the higher floor run defenders of any interior defensive lineman in this class.
I'm so impressed just by the way that he is able to shed blocks, like, and split double teams. It's very impressive. And so I can't wait to see that. And as far as, you know, how his production jumped this past season, that was really his first season as a full-time starter. So I'll ask you, like, given the context of maybe, you know, being more familiar with just the Texas team in general, or just like following college football, was there certain departures that made way for him to finally be that starter, or, you know, was it something else that got him that opportunity?
I mean, that Texas defense line's been loaded the last couple years. I mean, like I said, though, Collins was the guy that kind of was between a couple different positions early on in his career, between defensive end and kind of moving full-time inside. So that transition had to happen at some point. But also, Moro Ojimo, Byron Murphy, Sweats that got drafted by the Tennessee Titans. I mean, like, they had so many defensive linemen last 2 years. I mean, there was literally 2 other interior defensive linemen, Vernon Broughton and Bill Norton, that were both in this draft class as well. So like, that Texas defensive line room, especially on the interior, has been crazy as far as like the depth that they've had. So yeah, I think it's just one, transitioning inside, finding his best fits and his body continuing to develop. And then also you're talking about a packed room. So as soon as Byron Murphy and Moro Ojimo and all those guys are finally out of there, Sweats, then he got his opportunity to play inside. And I think that him continuing to build his body out and being 330 pounds now, I think that ultimately, like, he was a guy that when he came out of high school, he was a 5-star because he had so many physical gifts, but he wasn't necessarily a great football player yet, right? Like, that's the difference. Like, you're betting on traits with a guy like that early in his career. By the end of his career, and Pete Kwiatkowski, I think is how you pronounce his last name, the defensive coordinator for Texas, gave that guy credit, because for Texas for a few years there was horrible defensively, like really, really bad. The last like 3 to 4 years now, they're starting to trend upward where they're one of the best defenses nationally. And he is obviously a great example of that.
Yeah, I think that's another thing that gives me confidence is, like, with the first 2 picks, not only are you going with improving this run D, but you're also going to, you know, 2 schools that do it right out of the SEC, right? And so I have some good confidence that he's going to fit right in with the 49ers. Now, the following pick, maybe to some, you look at this pick, a linebacker. The 49ers certainly needed a linebacker, with Dre Greenlaw departing to Denver. Now, this was the first pick that a lot of people thought, wow, like that's a big reach, right? Because I think consensus-wise, at least in a lot of mock drafts, he was going in like the 7th round, maybe seen as more of a day 3 guy, which mock drafts aren't real life. But just, Ryan, tell me your thought on Nick Martin, and if you have that same thought of this being too early for a guy like him.
Yeah, no, I thought it was. And it's not even that like, so in a vacuum, yes, I thought it was too early for him. And then number 2, I just think there were some better linebackers on the board at that point. Like I really do. And so I understand the thought of the pick. He does fill the Dre Greenlaw molds, right? Of that really kind of shorter, denser will that can really fly to the perimeter. Like he's got really good speed, obviously, and range if you watch him at Oklahoma State, but he's a little bit smaller. His tackle radius is a little bit light, and he misses some tackles. I understand the thought process of Nick Martin. I understand it fully, but I personally hadn't talked to anybody that I know around the league that was like Nick Martin top 100. Like I did not see that pick happening ultimately. So I think it was a little bit of a reach. I understand it. I see what they're trying to do. And honestly, like it comes back to the original point when we were talking about the Mykel Williams pick. Coach Saleh is a defensive guy, so I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt, right? And I'm going to let this play out and see what it ultimately looks like. But yes, I did think it was a reach in a vacuum.
Yeah, I think I was talking to someone about this yesterday. I think it was Weston, actually, who was in the comments. And one thing that I think the 49ers do is like they almost talk themselves into a player so much that they believe other teams are high on the same player as well. And so if they wait to get this player, it's going to be way too late and they're going to lose out on potentially getting that player. So like they reach on some guys, and it may seem at this point for the 49ers, it's very on brand for them to reach or compared to the consensus, compared to big boards, like they don't care about that. Like they'll just get their guy. So clearly like this is their guy. And I think you can see why, like he plays with, the speed and just with his hair on fire is the way I describe it, because I think that's exactly the type of linebackers that they look for. You look at other guys that they've brought in, like Greenlaw, D. Winters, even last year, Tatum Bethune, right? Like all these guys, they may not always get to the right place, but they play fast. And they may also sometimes miss tackles because they're overshooting their guy, but they're fast. Like they're getting there, right? Like they're always wanting to get to the play, almost to their own detriment on some of these plays. But I think they feel like they can coach them into figuring out the right place to go and all that, and they just want them to be wired in a way where they're playing on go all the time.
Yeah. Well, and I will say again, the comfort even after Coach Saleh is if he ends up being a starter year 1, year 2, whatever, he's going to be playing next to Fred Warner, which is a great guy to learn from, great guy to have next to you. And we talked about the defensive lineman that they drafted. I mean, Mykel Williams and Alfred Collins and CJ West in the 4th round that I know we'll talk about at some point. Like this guy's going to be untouched a lot as a processor. Again, it's just about, can you finish plays? He made a lot of plays at Oklahoma State, but there was also a lot of plays that he missed, and he's got a small tackle radius, and he's not the biggest guy in the world, so he's not going to have the greatest power profile. But if you keep him clean, I can see the vision. I hope it works out. It's a little bit of a gamble, and it's okay to gamble sometimes because sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't, though, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, the 49ers know sometimes it doesn't work out, but yeah, hopefully Nick Martin is the exception to that. And I want to ask you about his size as well. I wonder, and I kind of think that maybe the NFL is moving towards being more comfortable with undersized linebackers. In fact, there were a few undersized linebackers in this class. And do you think it's going towards that way because how fast offenses are getting? Like you kind of have to have some of these smaller linebackers to keep up as well. Do you get a sense of that?
I do, yeah. I mean, I think it's cyclical. At some points, the run game is going to fully come back. I mean, we saw it a little
Yeah.
bit last year as far as like running at a higher volume, and we had a 2,000-yard rusher and almost another 2,000-yard rusher in Derrick Henry. So I think eventually it's going to come backwards though, where now we're going to prioritize size inside, and with how crazy athletes are getting, like we're just going to see more and more of like these massive linebackers that can just run for days. Like I do think that eventually it's just going to become a little bit of a cyclical thing, but certainly like the will linebacker position is still going to be a smaller guy just naturally. I mean, you just saw it with Dre Greenlaw, who's a little bit of a shorter guy as well. And one of my favorite linebackers in this class was Chris Paul Jr., who ended up going on day 3 out of Ole Miss. Like he is obviously a very small guy as well.
Went to your Rams.
I know. I was so happy about that pick. I was really happy about that pick. I was like, that's one of my guys. Finally, I feel like the Rams never draft a guy that I deem as like my guy. It never happens, but I think he'll be in a pretty good spot. But he's also like the similar type of player to Nick Martin. Like he's right around 6 foot. He is lighter built. He doesn't have a long tackle radius. So those guys need to overcompensate in some areas. Nick Martin's overcompensation is he can run, obviously like 4.53, in the 40 during testing, which is obviously a great number. If he's able to be a little bit more of a proactive, instinctive player, then I think that will only help to continue to grow, hopefully. But yes, that's the long-winded answer of saying, yes, size I don't think is as big of an indicator on the second level in today's game, but I do think eventually that evolution, the next step back to wanting more massive second level defenders is going to come at some point.
I'm actually I was a little surprised at first that the 49ers didn't draft Chris Paul. They had a 30 visit with him. There were some reports that linked the two. He got comps to Dre Greenlaw quite a bit as well. And he was available at that pick when they chose Nick Martin. So I guess they preferred Nick Martin out of the two. Yep. But yeah, you'll enjoy watching Chris Paul, play for your Rams on that defense. But speaking of size, though, the following pick was a very small but feisty corner in Upton Stout. And this is another one that I think could be categorized to some as a reach if you're just looking at the consensus versus where he was actually picked by the 49ers here. But having watched him, I could see exactly what the 49ers liked in him. He does play with a lot of feistiness, almost like a little chihuahua, right? But it like complimentary, of course. And especially in the run game, you see him with the nose for the ball, always wanting to be in on the action. He's fast, so he can chase down plays. So I love what I saw from him. Just all these words that people were using to describe him. Because I hadn't watched him ahead of the draft. It wasn't until after the 49ers picked him. But you start hearing these words of how people describe him. You see it exactly and right away once you watch his tape. So give me your thoughts on Upton Stout.
So I had no idea who this was in October during the season, even maybe into November. I can't remember exactly. But I had a buddy who actually is with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers text me and was like, hey, man, just so you know, there's this Western Kentucky defensive back that it could be a mid-round pick. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then you pop them on and the first impulse when you watch a player is I'm a body type guy. So I want to see, does he have long arms? Is he proportionally good as far as his lower body power, all that type of stuff. I just want to see what his body type looks like. And you watch him and you're like, am I really watching a 5'8" corner from Western Kentucky right now? Is that about to happen?
But you can't tell when you watch him.
And then you watch him and you're like, oh, this is one of my favorite picks for the 49ers in this draft. It just flat out is. This kid is, you can look at his size, you can overlook him if you want, but this kid will come up and he'll hit you in the mouth ultimately, right? And he's explosive. You tell by the testing. He's physical, and he has aced every part of this draft process. He did well in the All-Star circuit. He did well in testing. I heard he interviewed incredibly well. I've been told that he's an exceptional young man and incredibly intelligent. So you have that short area explosiveness with, and I know he's smaller, so like he's not going to play outside corner, obviously. Like he played all over the place at Western
Right.
Kentucky, but like if you told me that he plays some safety in the NFL level, I wouldn't be shocked, even though he's small, because I really think that this is a type of versatile player that can play all over the place. He's a nickel mostly, I think, in the NFL level. I think that's ultimately his home, but he's going to fit against the run. He's going to be proactive, and he's going to be in the right spot a whole lot. And at worst, even though he's smaller, this is going to be a dynamite special teamer.
Yes.
At worst, he's a rotational player on the back end that's going to be a core team guy. But at best, I think that he's a starting nickel and a pretty dang good one in the NFL.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that excites me a lot. And again, like, watching his tape, I could tell he's made of the right stuff. I don't know if you caught his call, like when the 49ers called him and he's calling everyone coach and he's like, let's go. Like it was one of the better draft calls that I've seen. I'm not surprised to hear that, he kind of aced the process and the character part of it. He just seems like a pretty easy guy to root for in all this. And, he's got some nice stats in his career dating back to 2020 as well. And I'm excited. I think this also allows for the 49ers to move Diamador exclusively to the outside and have someone like Upton Stout, who has I think the physicality and the speed that you want at that nickel spot. So I'm excited about this pick. Wow. I wasn't expecting you to hype this one up so much, but
he reminds me so much of
it.
Kenny Moore that plays for the Colts, who's been like one of the better nickels in the NFL for a long time. He's just, because again, he's a smaller guy too. And you just look at him and you have an assumption that goes to your mind. Like it happens, right? Like you see a white slot receiver, you see an undersized defensive back, you get an assumption in your mind that he is this player. And then he comes down and 7.5 tackles for loss this past year, right? Like he's a physical dude that will fit against the run despite only being 5'8.5" and 180 something pounds. Yeah, I really like him a lot. And you can overlook some of these guys, but I do think the evolution of the nickel position, like you asked about the undersized second level guys, right? The linebackers. But I do think that the nickel has been such an important position now over the last couple of years and has continued. I mean, we're getting guys drafted like Devin Witherspoon, for one, a couple years ago, that play almost exclusively nickel, and he got drafted in the top 10. I mean, we're seeing these guys more and more get valued at a much higher rate, and I think Upton Stout brings a lot to like in this process.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a tough spot to defend, so I guess it's not a surprise that teams are now trying to prioritize that a little bit more, including the 49ers. So another defensive pick. They got another one to start day 3 in CJ West, the defensive tackle out of Indiana. And I think this was a favorite for a lot of 49er fans, even throughout the draft process, because a lot of people kind of gave him the DJ Jones comp, which you can see, right? Like similar body styles, or like a tree trunk. They're cloggers in the middle. And so I think this is nice. I do want to ask you about where you kind of see him lining up, but I'll let you give your thoughts on West first, because
sure.
I wonder if West and Collins will probably be starting like both, right? And so then I wonder where Collins is going to line up, because you mentioned Collins you see as maybe more of a nose tackle, which West is like the nose tackle.
Sure. And so West, I just said Upton Stout might be my favorite player in this class. If it isn't Upton Stout, it's CJ West by far.
You can have two. It's all right.
Yeah, you can have two. So I actually recommended him to an agent 2 years ago when he was at Kent State. He wasn't even at Indiana yet, but I believed in his talents. And I would have lied to you. I'd be lying to you if I told you at that point I thought he was going to be a top 150 football player, like a 4th rounder. I didn't quite see that. But I saw a draftable football player at Kent State, and he got so much better at Indiana in his only year. Like, I felt like he trimmed down his body, took off some bad weight, thought he was more explosive, which when you see the 40 time, he ran in the 4.9s. Like, that was very obvious on film, the good vertical, all that type of stuff. Like, he is, despite being a shorter, more compact defensive lineman, he can, his first step is good, man. Like, he can get off the ball, and his hands are weapons. Like, he can really extend and gain extension at the point of attack. And I just love him. I think that his floor is extremely high. I think this kid is a starting interior defensive lineman by year 2, at least. And I think that he is just going to be one of those guys that maybe some people undervalue because he isn't flashy. He's not going to have like 10 sacks in a season. But what he's going to do is he's going to do a lot of that dirty work that we talked about before, and he's going to keep a lot of guys clean. I love CJ West, and I was so happy. One of my good friends is actually his agent as well. So like it kind of went full circle a little bit. I think that he is one of the more underrated football players in the draft. I thought he could have snuck into the top 100. He almost got there, but ultimately early 4th round pick from the 49ers, and I think he's going to be a tremendous player for San Francisco.
Yeah, and I think he fits, their defense and what they want to do. And so, yeah, I think he's probably going to be the nose tackle for them. That's where DJ Jones played as well, of course. And, he said it himself, his ideal alignment, his bread and butter is the one technique. He said, that's where I just abuse centers, punch them in the face, be as violent as possible, just creating havoc down there in the middle. I mean, you love to hear that from a kid. You definitely don't want to play him out of that spot if that's what he says he's going to do.
Sure. Well, and yeah, exactly. I mean, he knows what he's good at, and he's going to stick to it, obviously. He's just a really cool story, Steph, because so he went to I forget what the high school's name is. He played high school football with JJ McCarthy, actually. It's in the state of Illinois. Really good school out there. And I was shocked to see that because that's a school that produces a lot of talents for the college level. And for a player that's playing with JJ McCarthy, you would think that a lot of recruiters are going through there, right? Like a lot of college recruiters, and he ends up at Kent State, which is obviously he was very undervalued coming out of high school. But I really think that there's something to be said about those guys that are undervalued, start off at a certain level, dominate a certain level, then go to a higher level and continue to be dominant, if not more dominant. Like I think that little chip on your shoulder thing is a little bit cliche, but I think it matters though. Like I 100% think it matters. The fact that he was just as productive this past year at Indiana in the Big Ten comparatively what he was at Kent State, I think says a lot to his continued progress as a player.
Yeah, and I wouldn't doubt it if the 49ers looked that far back, and that goes into the whole character thing as well for some of these scouts. So yeah, that definitely does hold some weight. Now going back to where we possibly see CJ West. I mean, obviously he's going to be the nose tackle, but given that we think Alfred Collins also going to be a starter. So Collins, do you see him being more of a 3-tech guy lining up over guards?
Yeah, I think so he's longer, obviously, right? Like he's got 34 plus inch arms. He's 6 foot. He's right around 6'6". So he's a little bit of a longer guy. So he can play further from the center. Like he can move out further because he just has a little bit more of a tackle radius. He can play against down blocks and double teams a little bit more consistently, just being able to play outside of his frame. So that reach, I think, is valuable in that instance. And obviously with Salah's background, I imagine there's going to be some interchangeableness between 3 and 4 man fronts at times. So I could see him playing some 3 at times. I could see him playing 4-4-I. Like he can do all those types of things, could play head up because I think that even working against down blocks, like that reach, I think really helps him, especially in the run game. So he's definitely the more versatile of the two because of his body type, while CJ with the 31.5-inch arms and him only being 6'1", you want to kind of keep him in tighter quarters just because he doesn't have the greatest range as a football player just because of his size.
Look at this defensive line now. Nick Bosa, CJ West, Alfred Collins, Mykel Williams. I mean, I got to say, this already looks much improved from last year. Some of the guys that are on the right side of the column who are now going to be some of their depth pieces, like Gross Matos, Jordan Elliott, some of those guys were starting last year. So I think it says a lot about the improvements that the 49ers look to make on their defense. And, through these first, 5-6 picks in the class, like, yeah, it was all defense. And so you really start to see the vision.
Well, I will guarantee one thing. Outside of Nick Bosa, I'm still not sure exactly where the pass rush is coming consistently from, but I will say this is going to be one of the better run defending defensive lines in the NFL pretty quickly, because you talked about Mykel Williams, you talk about Alfred Collins, you talk about CJ West. What do they all have in common? They're very high floor run defenders. They will do that dirty work early on in the career. From there, it's about, hey, can I get more out of an Alfred Collins? Can I develop the Mykel Williams pass rush toolbox? Like those types of things. I don't really know the answer to that right now. So I don't think on obvious passing situations, you're going to see a great emphasis from that group. But I really do think that if you're talking about getting teams into long passing situations, right? Those 3rd and 9s, 3rd and 10s, 3rd and 7s, whatever. I do think that that's the defensive line to put them there because they just do really well at the point of attack.
Yeah, I agree. And, honestly, I think the 49ers secondary was better last year than it got credit for, but only because they never really got to, show what they were best at, which was the secondary last year. I mean, they got Lenore, as we mentioned. They have Renardo Green, who had a pretty nice rookie season for himself. And adding Upton Stout into that mix, if he's going to be the starting nickel at that point, I think that's going to be a pretty solid group. So suddenly I feel a lot better about the 49ers defense. But going forward, the 49ers started to shift towards some more offensive picks. Here in the 5th round, they got wide receiver Jordan Watkins out of Ole Miss. And again, this could have been seen as a little early for a guy like Watkins. There were other wide receivers that were still on the board at this point, but obviously they liked him. It's easy to see what they might have liked about him. He's got the speed. He had a lot of success at Ole Miss, led SEC in receiving touchdowns in 2024. But what did you like about Jordan Watkins? If you had to guess and put yourself in Kyle Shanahan's mind, what is he liking about him?
Speed. I mean, that's what he brings to the table ultimately, right? And I see you have fast right there. It's the first bullet point. That. I mean, that says it all, right? And it's a 5th round pick, so I could sit there and argue about, hey, I like wide receiver X over wide receiver Y, but at that point in the draft, it's really about what your cup of tea is. What are you trying to accomplish in your draft pick? And clearly they wanted to prioritize speed because on this team right now, I know Ricky Pearsall has some speed. Brandon Ayuk, I know, banged up and all that type of stuff, but I think they want to find a guy that can consistently try to stretch the field or at least take some attention off of their guys. You mentioned before you even brought me on here about the George Kittle extension for him long-term. Well, what's advantageous for George Kittle to the middle of the field and running deep crossers, all that type of stuff? It's having the middle of the field open a little bit more because teams are threatened by a vertical element in the offense. And that's what a Jordan Watkins could potentially bring. So he's not a perfect prospect, but there's no perfect prospect in the 5th round. You wanted a one trick that he does really well. And one trick that he does really well is he can threaten vertically ultimately. In that Ole Miss offense, Trey Harris, the wide receiver who went in the 2nd round, he was used more as your outside route runner, contested catch winner, while Jordan Watkins was one of the players that was able to create explosive plays in one-on-one situations. So you wanted the speed, you got the speed, and I think in the 5th round, it's fine value at that spot.
Yeah, and I think he'll probably see some time on the outside as well, not just exclusively in the slot, given that he has some of that speed as well. So, I'm excited for this pick. You didn't mention Jacob Cowing, but he's another guy on this roster that they have that has a ton of speed. So I'm okay, what's the plan for Jacob Cowing now? I mean, like I said, Cowing's probably more of a slot guy, whereas Watkins could line up outside as well. But yeah, I guess I'm curious to see what Jordan Watkins' path to getting on the field is. Maybe it just is Brandon Ayuk, not being available at the start of the season. They signed Demarcus Robinson. Is he going to be suspended? So we'll see how Watkins gets on the field. But like you said, I think there's definitely some nice upside in how Kyle Shanahan could use him in this offense. So it'll be interesting.
Unless there was a Puka Nacua that was on the board that is yet to show himself at that spot, no one's going to remember a missed 5th round draft pick, if we're being honest with ourselves, right?
49er fans will.
Well, I guess so. I guess some fans will. I should give people more credit than I guess. But I mean, the hit rate on 5th round picks just generally is so small. I am okay with a team investing in a vision. And for me, again, that vision is that 18.5 yards a catch this past year. That's what he ultimately is going to bring to the table. Maybe he only ends up being a depth player. Maybe he never plays at all. Maybe he ends up being a key rotational player. Who knows exactly what he'll end up being, but I do think that speed is something that is his calling card ultimately, and the reason that he is going to be on this roster.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we're staying on with the offense here. So 49ers got themselves a running back, which we assumed that they would in this deep class that it was. I just not sure if I was assuming that it would be a running back like Jordan James, although I do see what there is to like about him. He comes from a zone scheme. He's hard to bring down. I think that's one of the biggest things. He works well through contact. He kind of make the first line of defense miss. He's good in pass protection. He protects the ball. I think all those things give him a high floor. And, the 49ers lost Jordan Mason this offseason via trade. And so I almost see some similarities in their game where you can see Jordan James maybe being that short yardage kind of back. Maybe they can use him in the red zone as well. I know he had a lot of success there for Oregon. Yep. But give me your thoughts on Jordan James and how he fits in with this current 49ers running back room.
I think he does a lot pretty well. Nothing elites. Like, he's not a great athlete. He's not super explosive. But like you said, he'll block. He's got decent hands out of the backfield, and he does work well through contact. So I think that you need to have a clear, because I think it's tough for, you correct me if I'm wrong here, Steph, but like, I feel like it's a little bit tough for the 49ers fans, maybe a little bit, because you guys have seemingly hit on so many like late round running backs in my
all the undrafted free agents have outperformed the guys that they drafted.
Well, that's a good point. Was Elijah Mitchell was drafted, or was he?
I think he was like a 6th or 7th round pick.
Yeah, out of Louisiana Lafayette. Yeah. Well, I just think that a Shanahan, right? What are they notorious for? Just kind of finding gems at running back ultimately. And
yes,
there's been some misses like
Gore in the building.
Yes, and there's been some misses like Trey Sermon in the past and like those types of dudes, but everybody has those misses ultimately. I just think that there's expectations that you need to put on Jordan James comparatively to maybe some guys that have been massive hits. I don't think that Jordan James is going to be the next perennial 1,000-yard rusher for San Francisco long term. Like, I just don't think he's that type of guy, but I think you want him to be a solid backup, right? Like, if he turns into a Jordan Mason, who just had a pretty nice stretch last year, then that's great, right? Or if he's at least just a solid third down back that can also play special teams, that's what you're hoping for. I don't think he necessarily has starter upside in the NFL level. I think he's a guy that is a back end of the running back room that can do enough of the little things to be able to stick. So I think just expectation wise, I don't see massive upside with the Jordan James. I see an okay floor, which is, more than good enough.
15 touchdowns in 2024. So again, like he had some nice work there in the red zone. He's not going to be that home run hitter that you have in like Isaac Grendel or McCaffrey, which is how he fits into this offense, right? Because you already got the home run hitters, right? And so Jordan James just offers something else for this offense. And yeah, we'll get to Corey Kiner in a bit when we get to this.
So you want to hear something funny real quick? Like I actually like Corey Kiner more than I like Jordan James, to be honest, which is kind of funny, but it's funny.
Not funny, right? It's exactly how it goes for like 49ers all the time. Like, I'm not going to be shocked if Corey Kiner like looks like the second coming of Jesus in training camp, and then Jordan James just looks like the next bust. Like, it would not shock me because that's how it goes every year.
Well, wasn't Elijah Mitchell the Trey Sermon draft, right? Wasn't that the same exact draft? I think, if I remember correctly.
Might have been.
I think it may have been. In the 6th rounder outperformed the 3rd rounder, which is
for any
funny,
bust. You can find the UDFA or day 3 guy that they found as a gem.
Sure.
It's crazy. Yeah. It's really crazy. No, I don't know if you knew this, Ryan, but going into the next pick here, I'll give you some context. Malik Mustafa, who they drafted last year and who had a pretty solid, rookie season, he actually re-injured an ACL injury. It wasn't a tear, but he did re-injure. That injury, I guess they found out some point after the season ended. And so I was a little surprised after learning that they didn't prioritize safety a little bit more. But I do like Marques Sigle out of Kansas State and what he has to offer. He has a lot of versatility. He's got speed. He's rangy. Like, I do like his game. But would you be worried if he has to be thrust into a starting position early on in his career for this 49ers team?
I mean, yes. Yeah. I mean, ultimately, yeah. I think that he's a really explosive athlete. He was actually one of my last watches this cycle because I just didn't know too much about him until the testing and all that type of stuff. So I was like, all right, I need to get eyes on him. For me, when I watched him, I think that he plays a very aggressive brand of football. I think he's very explosive and he's got some versatility to him. He's played all over the place a little bit at Kansas State, but I do think that he is a little he's more reactive than proactive. And what I mean by that is I think that his eyes are a little bit late to certain spots and coverage. And I think he's a little bit late to react at times, but I think that he can close speed in a blink of an eye. So I think this is a special teamer more than anything. Maybe a guy that has some developmental upside, but I definitely don't think he's like a year one starter in the NFL. It's funny you said about Mustafa. We actually had him on the podcast last year, and I remember leaving that, and I'm like, that kid could play next year if he wanted to, because he was so mature, he was so smart, like all those types of things that kind of go undervalued a little bit. I don't necessarily see this with Sigle. Like I think that he is a talented athlete who is going to play a role. But I do think it's more about like year 2, year 3 development to see if you have something defensively. But I think special teams is kind of his calling card early.
Yeah, and I guess that's not a bad thing, but that goes back to my kind of worry that like why didn't they go for safety earlier in this class? I mean, there were some nice ones that they could have gotten. Jonas Sanker. I mean, there was Billy Bowman. Like I don't know. There were some other guys they could have picked. I get the upside. I can understand why they liked him, but maybe they're not as worried about Mustafa as us fans are going to be. But this is at this point in the draft, like I don't mind taking a flyer, on what could be a high floor pick, special teams, as you said. So if that's really the vision for him in year 1, I mean, that's not too bad.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that obviously when we're talking about a like 4.3 something athlete that has some underlying athletic traits, there's also an upside to the pick ultimately, right? Like again, I don't think he's a year 1 starting type of player or a year 1 like deep rotation type of player. I think this is more a let's get him on special teams, let's get him acclimated, and then hopefully year 2, year 3, he's able to be that guy. But you never know. I mean, obviously the 49ers have had some of those late round mid-round, late round safeties recently that have played a decent amount of football. Like you mentioned Mustafa, like we talked about Hufanga, right? Like some of these guys come in and they have roles like almost immediately. So maybe he outperforms kind of my expectation, but I think he's more of a developmental piece that's going to play a lot of special teams early.
Yep. And so he fits into this room with Mustafa, who's going to probably miss some time to start the season. And then we have Jair Brown as well. And so Jair Brown kind of didn't have a great second year, but it's going to be important for him to kind of turn the corner and kind of replicate a bit of his rookie success. And maybe with Robert Saleh, he can do that, right? So we'll see how the safety room
maybe Upton Stout might be playing some safety at some point too. You never know. Maybe there'll be cross trading there. I don't know.
I mean, based on what you had to say about him, I wouldn't count it out. He seems like a pretty good dude to be able to take on some other roles. So we'll see. Now in the 7th round, Ryan, Kyle always tries to get a quarterback towards the end of drafts, whether it's 7th round, UDFAs. And so this year they got Kurtis Rourke out of Indiana. And I mean, you maybe watch some Indiana football, right? I mean, Notre Dame fan, but there's a rivalry there, right?
There's no rivalry. Indiana's historically not very good at football. Maybe basketball a little bit. There might be a slight rivalry that I don't know. But I was actually at the Notre Dame Indiana playoff game this year, so I was able to see Kurtis Rourke in person, which was fun. I think that I don't mind taking late gambles on quarterbacks that have some developmental upside, and he does have a big frame. Obviously, he's a pretty good athlete as well. He was playing with a torn ACL this year, so he wasn't able to kind of showcase his athleticism that he saw at Ohio previously. But I don't think that he's a incredibly talented thrower in terms of like I think his arm strength is solid to good for NFL standards, but it's not like plus. And I think the arm talent is just very average for the NFL. So I think there are some limitations on him as a passer overall. But I will say he made a lot out of nothing at times during his career. Not even only at Indiana this past year, but I do think at Ohio especially, he was very good. So I would count that. I could see a world where Kurtis Rourke ends up being a pretty good backup in the NFL. I don't think this is the next Brock Purdy. Like, I don't think that's that where it's like he's a late round guy that eventually becomes a starting quarterback and he has got a ton of upside. I think that we're probably looking at a backup and potentially a solid to good backup in the NFL.
Yep, and he fits in this room with Purdy, Mac Jones, Tanner Mordecai. And, given the fact that he had the ACL injury, maybe the 49ers just put him on IR for the season, but he's already 25. So limited upside there as well. But there's some nice skill sets, I think, to work with that obviously Kyle Shanahan does like. Now, the following 7th round pick, Connor Colby, I think, again, another like upside pick, maybe can make himself can get on this roster. I mean, he offers some versatility, has a ton of experience at Iowa, zone-based scheme. I mean, and these Iowa guys, like, they covet run blocking, right? And they're coached very well. So I feel good about Connor Colby, especially this late in the draft, 7th round.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's a scheme fit, obviously. Like, Iowa has traditionally been like more of a gap power system, but the last couple of years, especially with Caleb Johnson, the running back this year, they ran a lot more inside and outside zone, which is really nice. So he's experienced to work to the second level, be able to open up laterally and be able to move. I mean, he's a pretty good athlete overall, and he's physical. I think that his angles are very inconsistent. I don't think he plays with the greatest leverage always. Like, he plays a little bit upright a little too often, but certainly he's been coached well at Iowa. That is a program that has traditionally turned out pretty good offensive linemen. I think that when you combine the body type he has and the solid athleticism, I do think he presents some position flexibility. Like, ultimately, you're drafting this kid to hopefully be a swing player inside. So hopefully to play both guard spots, play center. And I think that he has enough traits that he could potentially develop into that type of guy.
Yeah. And there's a lot of guys. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear the audio on this one. I'm trying to, for all the guys that they have in their offensive line, I mean, it's crowded, right? But I like I said, the upside of this one. And I think he can definitely make himself, I don't know what I'm trying to say. He could get himself on the roster is what I'm trying to say. And I think there's definitely a spot for him. The 49ers offensive line, it's pretty much a free for all once you get past like the starters of this group. And there's even going to be a competition at the left guard spot this offseason. So who knows? Maybe Connor Colby could be the next Dominic Pooney. I don't think so, but at the very least, someone who's going to add some depth, who has a lot of experience, and the 49ers could develop in the background in the meantime. So I like that. Yeah. And speaking of 7th round, so they capped off their last pick with wide receiver Junior Bergen out of Montana. And, you see some of the upside with him. I think it's strictly special teams upside, right? That was really his bread and butter. 4.53. I don't know. Speed is maybe a stretch, right? But maybe in the big sky, that's speed. But in the NFL, I kind of wonder how that'll go for him. And so I think his upside is maybe slightly capped. And I'd like to see him do it at the NFL level, what kind of success he's going to have. Speed isn't everything, even in returning. Like, I think there's other traits to have, like good vision and agility that can help.
Yes.
But what are your thoughts on Junior Bergen, if you got a chance to watch him at all in the lead up to the draft?
I did, yeah. I admittedly watched more of the 2023 stuff than 2024 because I thought he just had a little bit of a better season overall. I ended up not being able to get to his 2024 tape this cycle, but he is one of the best returners that we have ever seen in college football, regardless of level. Like, forget FCS, FBS classifications for a second. Like, he did everything for Montana. Obviously, he was a good receiver, but his bread and butter was always as a dynamic punt returner. I just returner in general. And I do think that when you're a punt returner, especially if you're trying to fight for that job, straight line speed is great, but I think that it's the ability to make the first man miss. So that comes more to quickness and short area stuff. And I think that he can contend to potentially be that type of guy. And ultimately, if he makes the roster, it's going to be because he did that. He's smaller, 5'9", 180 something pounds. He's not the most explosive athlete of all time. He's more smooth and quick than I would call him explosive. But so as a wide receiver, it's very average as far as like his developmental to an NFL perspective. But I do think that if he's able to find a role as a punt returner on this team and to impact special teams, I think that is his path towards hopefully making the roster.
Yeah, they got a couple of options there as well. So, I mean, hopefully the best man wins, and that could be Bergen at the very least. He can be an option for them on their practice squad this year, and he can make that. Again, seventh rounders, I mean, you're really just looking for anything that's going to give you that extra bit of value, and I think he has it with the special teams and return ability. So
we always talk about it on, especially on day 3 players. We always talk about like the sticking points. That's kind of how I phrase it, and it's what gives you the ability to hopefully make a roster. Like you just talked about Connor Colby from Iowa. I think his sticking point is experience and ultimately his flexibility to play a couple different spots in the interior. For Junior Bergen, it's special teams value. Like that's his sticking point to a roster because, hate to break it to most people, but like every 7th round pick is obviously not a great player on offense or defense. They need the ability to be able to stick in some capacity, and I do think that is potentially his sticking point is on special teams.
Yeah, and he's going to need that because it is a pretty deep wide receiver room as it stands, and so you need something to stand out for sure. It's probably really just competing over who's going to be that 7th or 8th wide receiver on this roster, and so they'll have a couple of options, but having that special teams upside is really what's going to set some of these guys apart. Let's cap it off with talking about the undrafted free agents for the 49ers. It's not a very long list, which I was slightly surprised by. So they got 6 undrafted free agents. They got wide receiver Isaiah Nayer out of Nebraska. Talked about Corey Kiner out of Cincinnati, BYU corner Jacob Robinson, linebacker Stone Blanton. That's an elite name, Ryan. But I don't know if his game matches, but that's a hell of a name. Out of Colorado, offensive lineman Drew Moss, and then out of Washington, defensive lineman Sebastian Valdez. I mean, you already mentioned that you love Corey Kiner. Any other names here that kind of stick out as maybe guys who can make the roster at the very least practice squad?
Yeah, I think there's a couple options, to be honest. I admittedly have not seen Stone Blanton, so I don't have any notes on him, but I've seen a little bit of Robinson. I think he's an interesting corner coming out of BYU. But I mean, those first 2 and then the last one for me on this list is what really pops. Corey Kiner, I think, is one of the most undervalued running backs in this class. Just overall, I was kind of surprised he still didn't get drafted. I thought he would at least be like a 6th, 7th rounder, somewhere in that ballpark. But he is some of the best contact balance of any running back that was in the 2025 class. Second effort runs. He's not the most explosive back of all time. He's not even the biggest back of all time, but he just finds hidden yardage, man. Like he's one of those guys that just kind of turns his legs, finds extra contact. Like he is a really just good inside runner. So I would not be shocked if he at least contends to try to make a roster, if not a practice squad. Isaiah Nayer is fascinating because he had some medicals during his career. So he was a Wyoming, Texas, Nebraska guy. So that was kind of his travels. But at Texas, there were people a lot excited about him, but then he got injured and then he kind of fell out of the depth chart a little bit because of the injury. He showed some signs at Nebraska, obviously later in his career, but this is a height, weight, speed guy that has some developmental upside. So I would think that you would love to at least get him on the practice squad, if not try to sneak him onto a 53, because he does have that value. I think that he should at least be a nice special teamer if he's able to stay healthy, but there's definitely developmental upside. And then Sebastian Valdez, I think, is really interesting. He was at Montana State. Then he transferred this past year to Washington. He's a little bit of a lighter dude, not the best run defender of all time, but he's a pretty good athlete. Like he's got a pretty good first step. He's got some penetration upside, especially when he was at Montana State. And I think he had a little bit of backfield production this past year at Washington as well. So we talked about like CJ West and those guys, as far Alfred Collins, as far as being like these dense physical run defenders. That's not Valdez. If Valdez makes this team somehow or makes a practice squad, it's going to be because he has some penetration upside. Like maybe on passing downs, he can provide a little bit of pop. But I do think that he's very interesting to at least bring into a camp.
Which they kind of need, right? I mean, they got all these guys to clog up the run D, but you don't really have those guys who can create the disruption in the pass game. And so I'm all ears for Valdez. And I did, kind of see around the pro day circuit that he was turning heads and impressing scouts. Yeah. He tested very well. So that one was really interesting to me. And the 49ers had a, pretty nice undrafted free agent find last year with Evan Anderson. And he's on the roster. So, hey, you never count these dudes out. We'll see, especially on the defensive side, because they're in need of so many bodies there and just so many new faces that we're going to see. going to be a ton of competition. So I'm just excited for, this class. I was a little surprised, Ryan, you didn't bash this draft a little too much. So I'm like, hell yeah, we are so back.
Yeah, I mean, admittedly, there were a couple players that I would have picked. Like, even if we just stick with the same position, there were a couple players that I would have picked a different player. But I understood the process, right? Like, the process made sense to me. What Coach Lynch, what John Lynch was able to do, what Coach Shanahan and the staff was trying to do in this draft. Again, like, as an analyst, like, I always disagree with some players that they take. Like, I talked about it. Instead of Nick Martin, I probably would have taken Chris Paul, or I would have taken Smile Munden, like, out of Georgia, like some other linebacker most likely in that spot. But you lost Drake Greenlaw, and I understand why you wanted a lightning fast will linebacker that could play sideline to sideline like a Nick Martin. It makes sense to me. That process makes sense. And ultimately, as long as the process makes sense, I'm willing to let things play out to see how they do, because Robert Saleh defensively, Kyle Shanahan offensively, I believe that both those people obviously have great reputations of developing the talent they have for the most part. So I'm going to take a step back and I'm going to see how it develops. And in the end, that will decide whether it was a good draft or not.
Well, yeah, I mean, that is yet to be written for a lot of these players. So can't wait to see how it all plays out for these guys. But Ryan, thank you so much for joining me today to talk about it. And yeah, hope to have you back next year to do it all over again. Again, this has been kind of a fun process that we've done for the last couple of years. And I always appreciate your insight.
No, and I appreciate you for the annual tradition at this point, which is always fun. And, it's funny because I am a Rams fan by choice there. So we combine the Rams and the 49ers together, which shouldn't be fun, but it always is fun for sure.
At least as like we're talking about like draft prospects and not so much, the rivalry there. But yeah, always good times. Thank you so much, Ryan. Thank you to everyone that tuned in, kept the live chat popping. Appreciate you all. Make sure you like this video. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Follow Ryan on Twitter if you haven't yet, at Rise and Draft. That is in with a letter N, Rise, letter N Draft. And check out his work. He puts out great content, and he's already getting into the 2026 draft, like the psycho that he is. So we love that for him. And make sure you guys give him a follow. But for now, folks, have a good rest of your Tuesday. Peace.